Greetings from my Friday office in the Angeles National Forest, the ancestral home of the Creech Nation. I'm Dr. Nick Mather, and in this video I want to discuss the idea that the ecological crisis is also a religious crisis. Now, I'm using that term religious very specifically. We could also say that the environmental crisis is a spiritual crisis, and maybe there isn't much of a difference between religious and spiritual, but that's a topic for another video. Instead, I want to focus on religion. Now, religion is a very difficult term to define. In my religious studies courses, I present a list of over 50 different definitions of religion. I think most people, though, think of the organized religious traditions when they think of religion. But what I want to do is take it back to its origins. When we examine the etymology of the word religion, we discover it derives from the Latin religere, which means to rebind or to reconnect. Of course, the next question is then to rebind or reconnect to what? Typically, it is understood as reconnecting with the divine, with God. Although we could also say it is to reconnect with the sacred. Then that begs another question. What is the sacred? The sacred is usually something that is set aside as other than human. In the words of the theologian Rudolf Otto, it is the mysterium tremendum e fascinans. It is that which is totally mysterious and produces a sense of awe and maybe a little fear, and yet it is completely fascinating. We are drawn to the sacred. The natural world can certainly elicit a sense of awe, which is something I'll return to at the end of this video. But first, I want to look at what prompted my initial question, whether the ecological crisis is also a religious crisis. This stems from an article that was published in 1967 by a UCLA historian, Lynn White Jr. And this paper was very influential and controversial, and it was titled "The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis." In this, he argued that the Western worldview, which had been deeply influenced by Christianity, is to blame for the ecological crisis. White argued that the creation story found in Genesis 1 and 2 of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament if you're Christian, was much to blame for this. In the biblical creation story, the world seems to be created solely for the benefit of humans, and it specifically states that humans should have dominion over the natural world and all living creatures. The physical creation, according to Genesis, seems to have no other purpose but to serve humanity. This sets up a human nature dualism where humans are seen as being separate from nature. In Genesis 1, humans are made in the image of God. Nothing else in creation can lay claim to this. This, according to White, is the source of an anthropocentrism that lies at the heart of the ecological crisis. And yet, in Genesis 2, at least, the first man, Adam, is made of the clay of the earth. Now, Adam is not necessarily a proper name, but it is often used as the Adam, the Adam, where it can refer to humanity as a whole or to an individual male. It is derived from the Hebrew word for the earth, Adama. So one way of translating Adam, and this is my personal favorite way, is as earthling. It's a good reminder that we are made of the stuff of this world. God breathes the breath of life into Adam, so humans have a spirit, a soul. Now, before the emergence of the Israelite tradition, the evidence suggests that the people in the ancient land of Canaan and throughout Mesopotamia were animistic. Animism is the idea that everything has a spirit, not just humans and animals. There's a spirit to the land, to the desert, to the rivers, the mountains, the trees. Everything is alive. However, the ancient Israelites break from this idea. One of the Hebrew words used for soul is nephesh. This is used over 600 times in the Hebrew Bible. Nefesh refers to living beings, but only those with sentience. So humans and animals have nefesh. Plants are not referred to as having nefesh. Eventually, though, even the idea that animals have soul or spirit will be discarded by Western philosophers. The father of modern philosophy, René Descartes, insisted that only humans have souls. Animals, according to Descartes, are little more than machines. In Genesis, especially Genesis 1, God is portrayed as being transcendental. That is, that God is above and beyond this world. Now, that's not quite as true in Genesis 2, where God is more anthropomorphic. God walks in the garden, for example. Yet, this idea is almost entirely abandoned as the Abrahamic traditions develop. Indeed, the goal for Christians is also largely transcendental. The world is less important than an unworldly, unchanging, eternal heaven. Genesis also gives us the story of the fall, where the first humans disobey God, and as punishment are banished from the Garden of Eden and are forced into the wilderness. Now, wilderness has a central position in the Bible, both descriptively and as a symbolic concept. The term occurs 245 times in the Old Testament and 35 in the New. Also, terms like desert and wasteland, which have the same essential meaning as wilderness, are used several hundred times in the biblical text. We get our word for wilderness from the Norse languages. The root of wilderness is will, which is self-willed, willful, or uncontrollable. From willed came the adjective wild, which implies being unruly, disordered, out of control, lost. Initially, this was applied only to human conduct, but was eventually extended to other life forms. Another part of the etymology of wilderness is dior, which meant animal. It's also the source for the word deer. Dior refer to creatures not under control of humans. They have their own will. One of the earliest uses was in the 8th century epic Beowulf. Wildior referenced these savage and fantastic beasts that lived in the dark of the forest. Wildiornus, then, is literally the place of wild beasts. This is the place where they roar their terrible roars and gnash their terrible teeth and roll their terrible eyes and show their terrible claws. Wilderness implied an absence of humans. It was a place where a person was likely to get into a disordered, confused, or wild condition, where they may engage in a wild rumpus and romp and stomp and roar. Wilderness is the place where civilization is absent. Wilderness is now defined as uncultivated, undeveloped land. The absence of humans and presence of animals is assumed. Wilderness can also refer to any place where a person feels stripped of guidance, where they are morally lost and unsure of what to do. The ancient Hebrews regarded the great and terrible wilderness as cursed land. When God wanted to punish people, he would transform the land into a wilderness. When he wanted to express his pleasure, he would turn the wilderness into a good land full of fountains and springs. The identification of the arid wasteland with God's curse led to the conviction that the wilderness was the environment of evil, a kind of hell on earth. The wilderness was where demons and devils lived. Eden is the opposite of the wilderness. The word Eden means delight. And there's no mistake that in the biblical text, Eden is cultivated land. It's a garden. It is not wilderness. Now, White doesn't make this point, but the environmental historian Carolyn Merchant has argued that the human project of cultivating land, not just for farming, but even turning prairies into strip malls, for example, is an expression of the desire to return to Eden. We pave over the paradise we have been given in order to return to a paradise of myth. Very quickly after Lynn White Jr. published his article, faith communities responded that there's a tradition of caring for the environment. Yes, the Hebrew Bible seems to condone dominion, but there is also a tradition of stewardship where humans are supposed to take care of the natural world. Furthermore, there is evidence of environmental exploitation before the biblical text was even written. For example, in the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, the first exploit of Gilgamesh and his buddy Enkidu is to kill Humbaba, the forest guardian who protects the forest of Lebanon, and Enkidu and Gilgamesh steal all the trees. Non-Western cultures have also exploited their environments without support of a monotheistic tradition. At the end of his essay, White did offer St. Francis as a model for Christians to follow in righting their relationship with the earth. St. Francis is the patron saint of ecologists. He saw that creation was good, and because of that, humans have a duty to protect creation and to be its stewards. St. Francis had a great love for animals and would preach to the birds, and in one story he even reasoned with a wolf. Pope Francis took his name in honor of St. Francis. Pope Francis is also deeply concerned with environmental issues. His encyclical, Our Common Home, is about the human relationship with the environment and the damage that we are doing to our home. In the encyclical, Pope Francis uses the term integral ecology several times. There's even an entire chapter titled Integral Ecology. Pope Francis doesn't really offer a clear definition of integral ecology, although it seems to refer to the idea that everything is interconnected. Integral refers to something as being essential. It speaks to the wholeness and the idea that we are part of the natural world. We cannot maintain a dualism that sees the human as separate from creation. This extends to other areas as well. For example, we cannot continue to see the economy as separate from the environment. The environmental crisis is a social crisis. It is a crisis of values, and that was exactly what White's point was. There are other figures in the Christian tradition that can help support a better relationship with the environment. Theologian Matthew Fox supports a creation spirituality, where he draws upon the Christian mystical tradition, where the natural world was often seen as evidence for God. For example, the Christian mystic Meister Eckhart wrote that it is possible to apprehend God in all things, for God is in all things. This is a Christian panentheism. If God is in all things, then all things are sacred. When we despoil the natural world, then we are denigrating God. The evangelical pastor Jonathan Edwards, who is considered by many to be one of America's greatest theologians, also offers a way of honoring God's creation. Edwards is perhaps best known for his sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, which is full of hellfire and damnation, but it's unfortunate that many only know him from that. In Edwards' cosmology, there was a loving God at the center of creation that is continually pouring forth his love. Creation was not just a one-time event for Edwards, but a continuous process. God's creation was good, so we could learn virtue by immersing ourselves in his good creation. Perhaps Edwards laid the original foundation for the work of John Muir a few hundred years later. Muir was also deeply religious, although he abandoned the evangelical tradition of his father in favor of a nature-based religion, where the wild country was his church. Muir's writings are full of descriptions of the awe and the ecstasy that can be experienced in the natural world. And I think this is something that many people can relate to. Last summer, as I was driving back from Denver, I had to pull over in the Arizona desert to watch a sunset. I was mostly alone on a two-lane road, and the sunset was absolutely stunning. Now, I'd been driving for several hours and kind of wanted to get home, so I left before I should have. After I had gotten onto the 10 freeway and was heading west, the sky exploded in colors that I just can't describe. I was driving right into it, but unfortunately there was no place to pull over and to take it all in. As I drove, I found myself channeling Mir, shouting, "Glory, glory, glory," at this ineffable beauty unfolding before me. White suggested that maybe what was needed to overcome the ecological crisis was a new kind of animism. I'm certainly not opposed to that idea, but I think that for many people what is necessary is not seeing the land as alive, but in recognizing its beauty and goodness from a theistic position, and understanding that relating to God's creation requires humility on our part. The main point, though, is that we need to reconnect to the natural world. We've seen ourselves as separate from it from far too long, and this reconnection, by definition, is religious. So, what do you think? Have the world's religious traditions helped create the ecological crisis? Can they be called on to help us heal the planet and to help us heal ourselves? If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up below and feel free to share it. If you'd like to see more content like this, I'd be very grateful if you subscribe to my channel. I'll be posting more videos soon on ecology, religion, spirituality, and some other topics as well. Be sure to click the notification icon so that you will be notified when I upload new videos. Until next time, I hope you find yourself surrounded by beauty and that you flourish in all possible ways.